Goth's doors have always been open. It's been a refuge for the misunderstood and those seeking truth in the shadows. But open doors don't always welcome the curious and the sincere. They also let in those with hollow intentions. Those who wear the look, but they don't carry the story. It's strange how time unfolds. The very same hands that shoved us into lockers, called us freaks, said we were depressed, said we were even satanic. The bullies, the so-called normies, now film Get Ready With Me and reaction videos in fishnets and black lipstick. Curious. Goth is more than simply just a style. Goth is a living history. It is the beating heart of music, of art, and of belonging. And those doors stay open. They stay open to anyone curious and anyone wanting to enter with curiosity and with respect. Those there to listen, to learn, and be part of something real. So get in here already. You're letting the moths out. When you think of the 90s, what do you remember? Some think of Beavis and Butthead, some think of Frosted Tips, they think of Beanie Babies, grunge distortion, the resurgence of jelly shoes. I remember lots of black eyeliner. I remember PVC and that deflated feeling of trying to get a hold of your friend on the landline only to get their answering machine. I remember cemetery photo shoots with disposable cameras and feeling everything too much and all at once. We were the ones who doodled in the margins of our notebooks roses, crosses, coffins, maybe a Cure lyric or two, Disintegration, the album of choice. We weren't just dressed in black, we were painted in meaning. In a time where all of that meant something. We didn't dress that way for anybody else, we dressed that way for ourselves. To feel something in a world that just felt lacking. We wanted more than your shallow offerings of your average suburban 90s high school. And that and Taco Bell. To signal to the few who might understand. Our style, it wasn't performative, it was a password. It was a quiet rebellion. It was a way of saying, hey, let's make a mixtape and explore the shadows. But instead, they called us disturbed. Parents, teachers, pastors, principals, they never asked us why. They asked, what's wrong with you? We weren't sick. We weren't sensitive. We weren't violent. We were vivid. We didn't see the world the same way that other kids did. We didn't see the world the same way other adults did, but didn't mean we didn't try. Some were nice, others were not. Where they saw simplicity, we saw symbols. Where they searched for fun, we searched for meaning, which was also fun. We listened to the radio on occasion, but we didn't rely on it. We went to our local music stores. We went looking for something different. We wrapped ourselves in Sisters of Mercy, Bauhaus, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, Depeche Mode. We loved the 80s. While others chased parties and popularity, we were perfectly at ease to stay in our rooms, often together, just talking about the paranormal by candlelight, having deep discussions about just the way that we felt. Nothing stigmatized about that. Burning incense and building an atmosphere that would become our sanctuaries. Letting music on our little boom boxes stitch together what the world tore apart. But instead of seeing all of that as safe and as sacred, the parental units and the authority figures looked at that and they saw it as something wrong. Not mine, fortunately, but I was definitely a victim of the authority figures from school and otherwise, and I definitely watched my friends suffer by way of their parents as a result. They would have much preferred that we were out drinking somewhere in parking lots or making some dumb mistake in some unfinished basement somewhere. Because to them, at least, that was normal. That was something that they in their heads could quantify. It angered them. They worried about the black eyeliner, but they didn't worry about the red Solo cups. They feared the poetry, but not the peer pressure. They mistook solitude for sickness. They mistook depth for danger. And everything that made us different or unique was something that they felt needed to be corrected. We weren't broken. We were just uninterested in pretending. I remember one night, many moons ago, still lingers like smoke in the back of my head. My friend was staying with her biological father for the weekend. Her parents divorced and remarried, which gave her 4 judgmental and unreasonably cruel parents. Her father was a man who did not understand us, nor did he have any inclination to. Which is why I was so surprised that he not only consented to allow my friend to go to our favorite all-ages event, but he offered to drive all of us. We often traveled in groups. He had a minivan, beige, boxy, smelled like stale coffee and old resentment. 8 of us crammed inside to this minivan, wearing deliberately ripped fishnets, elaborate makeup, combat boots, all sort of happily chatting amongst ourselves. We were excited, we were buzzing, and we were kind of talking over each other about this club night that we'd been going to all summer because it was an all ages and it was open every Sunday when there was no school on Monday, so it was something that we grew to look forward to. They played goth, they played industrial music, they played some grunge music, and a whole slew of different alternative music, but it was a tiny kingdom that was ours and made us feel like ourselves. Her father didn't say much the entire ride, but I caught him stealing glances at everybody from the rearview mirror, kind of like we were specimens in some moving exhibit that he hadn't signed up for. A sea of black fabric, platform boots, and strange beauty, the kind that we all saw as home. It was a sea of our people. We gathered our things, we slide the door open, and her father breaks the silence and says, "Why does everybody wear all black?" And no one answered him, which made me feel very uncomfortable with the awkward silence. So I guess maybe out of some weird sense of politeness or wanting to break that awkward silence, I'd said, "It's tradition, I guess." He scoffed, turned his head toward me and grunted, "What do you know about tradition?" And just like that, the moment cracked. Nobody said a word. We slid the van door shut and he drove off, leaving us among our people in the neon glow of the lights outside, surrounded by strangers who somehow knew us better than our own blood ever would. We're alive in ways that they didn't quite have a language for. They didn't want poetry. They wanted obedience. They called our depth dangerous, our music demonic. They saw our fishnets, our eyeliner, heard our music, and looked at our journals full of lyrics and longing, and diagnosed us with dysfunction. Depressed, disoriented, delinquent. They never asked how we felt. They asked us how do we stop it. So they reached for the pharmacy. Risperdal, Prozac, Zoloft, lithium. Kids during this time, we were not medicated to heal, but to conform. Souls were sedated. Imaginations turned into clinical concerns. They used pills like erasers, trying to rub out every little thing that made us different. Some of us locked away, not for breaking rules or breaking laws, but for strange attire, for writing poetry and not Sweet 16 invites with little stickers on them. So they tried to fix us, when all we ever actually needed was the trust and grace to be allowed to explore and simply be ourselves. The irony of that was the majority of us were far more responsible than many of the normie nutbags that were allowed to congregate. Some of them were absolutely hilarious at a distance, but you did not want to get caught in that friendly fire. We were not running toward the darkness with sex and drugs and debauchery. We were just tired of pretending that the light didn't burn. Simply put, it wasn't who we were. We would turn frustration or confusion into poetry. We would turn isolation into imagination. Sadness into art, and strangeness into style was the best. We made zines, we wore velvet in summer, and on nights out we danced like we totally didn't practice that in our room the night before. We lived in metaphors, we asked big questions, we felt. And feeling was our rebellion at a world that flinched from its own reflection. We dared to look inward, and we weren't fragile for feeling deeply, we were forged by it. Because while others swallowed their sadness, we wore it like armor. We chose to bleed honestly, to cry without shame, to love without dilution, to express what they spent their entire lives avoiding in the hopes that protein powder, brain rot, and twerking might suppress. It won't. It wasn't a weakness, it was a radical strength to feel absolutely everything and still choose to build beauty out of the wreckage. Now as adults, we still carry the memories. We remember all too well being called troubled when we were simply just thoughtful, being drugged into silence because we dared to ask the questions that made the adults around us uncomfortable. They wanted us quiet, they wanted us simple, fixed. They sat us across from therapists, our black clothes seen as evidence, poetry as pathology, and pills to mute the music in our minds. And when we still didn't smile enough, they deemed it defiance. But we didn't stop being who we were. We just learned to carry it quieter. We grew into adults that learned to hold beauty and pain in the same palm, paraded in runways and sold in fast fashion stores. Which, in theory, shouldn't be a bad thing because it makes those things more accessible to us. And it would be great if all of this were because of all of the bullshit that we had endured up until this point. If all of that bullshit led to an acceptance. So all of the suffering that went on prior to that, those who came after didn't have to deal with it. And to many, it is, but the rest not so much. Filtered and monetized by influencers who were, ironically, once the same people who called us freaks. Now they wear black lipstick for clicks and call it goth. Funny how the world works sometimes. They performatively expressed themselves in a way for cliques that we were formally institutionalized for. And maybe in some ways we should feel somewhat vindicated for that, but mostly it just feels quite hollow. Because to us, this was never about a look, it was a lifeline. It wasn't about performing, it was about surviving. And it's frustrating to watch the culture we built from the wreckage of our childhoods get rebranded by the same society that tried to medicate it out of us. But here's the difference. We still carry that original flame, the real thing, the ache, the art, the soul of it. We never wore black to impress. We wore black because the world felt like a funeral, and we simply just wanted to dress appropriately. And even now, in an age of algorithm goths and fast fashion nihilism, we remain the quiet kids who grew into loud souls. The misfits who kept creating, even though nobody was watching. The once broken, but still beautiful, and still here. These days, there is a strange irony in how the conversation has shifted. We speak about the roots of goth. The roots, the subversion, the community, the history. And some people get straight up defensive. They say that we're being elitist. They say that we're gatekeeping. That we're taking it too seriously because it's not that deep. That goth has evolved without the music. If you take away the music, you are not evolving goth. You're simply dissolving it into something unrooted. And every time I hear it, I recognize the tone, and it is a tone that if you've been there, we have all heard that tone before. It is coming from the same people that mocked us over the clothes that we were wearing, the color of our hair, who stole and vandalized our mixtapes and our CDs, the people who called us freaks, dosed us with psychiatric drugs, and then further twisted the knife when our friends would return to school after one of their inpatient stints that their parents decided to sign them up for, just to simply shock the goth out of us. Our silence was rude, our music was stupid. They couldn't understand it then, and they still don't understand it now. They've just dressed it up in the language of tolerance. But let's be clear. Saying goth isn't about the music is like saying poetry isn't about words. It's revisionism. If worse, it's erasure. You can't take the soul out of a thing and still call it by the same name. If I dump this out, is it still a Coke or is it an empty can? When we share the roots, we're not shutting people out. The book was never hidden. The ink was never invisible. If you don't understand the meaning, it's not because we kept it a secret. It's because you never bothered to read past the cover. We're inviting you to go deeper. We want you to. We are literally offering you a map, so it doesn't get stuck on the surface level version of our lives that is currently being sold back to us as a trend. That's not gatekeeping. That's cultural memory. That's what you do when something that you had helped build, something that was actively held against you, when it was dangerous to love what we loved, when it cost something to show up like we did. So when somebody rolls their eyes at our passion for the origin of goth, when they reduce it to just a look by saying, oh, it's not that deep, we see it for what it is. It is the same voice that told us to smile more, told us to stop being so intense, made fun of us for wearing black. It's the same attitude that shoved us into lockers, and now conveniently wants a curated version of our subculture without having to understand its weight. But we remember, and we're not bitter, we're grounded. We don't share the history to hoard it. We share it to honor it, because for us, it's not just an aesthetic, it's a lineage. And we, goths, we are its living archive.